We are joined by the Honourable Minister of Lands, Agriculture, Fisheries, Water and Rural Resettlement, Dr. Masuka. Just last week, the Minister of Finance and Economic Development, Professor Jongwe, did a budget review, and analysts believe that agriculture received more attention owing to the strides that it has made since the inception of the leadership of Dr. Masuka. Dr. Masuka, we're right at your offices, but we welcome you to TechMag.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, agriculture was allocated more than enough. We saw from Minister Mutulungu's budget review that the growth of the Agric sector in 2021 has been revised upwards on account of a higher than expected performance of almost all crops, particularly maize, groundnuts, and sorghum. Why is this so?
Well, we are most appreciative for the accolades that we have received from the various stakeholders. It is a multi-stakeholder effort to be able to produce so much and turn around the fortunes of the country in a season. Just goes to show that if we work together, we can do more. We had a very good rainfall season, and that is also on the back of better planning and better inputs availability, better coordination on the ground, better capacitation of the extension and advisory services, because we've motorized our extension services. So all this conspired to give a very good harvest. And the revision to 34% growth from the 11% that had been originally projected is good news. But I set out, and then the mandate given to me by the President, His Excellency Dr. E.D. Mnangagwa, was to transform agriculture. So what we have seen is an improvement. So it is good, but not good enough, because it is not a transformation yet.
The sector is estimated to grow by 34%, up from the budgeted 11%. How are you going to factor that in? You were expected to be 11%, but now there's 34%. How are you going to handle that capacity?
No, certainly. We have now done our preparedness for the 2021-2022 agricultural season. So we've actually tried to be even better prepared for this coming season compared to last season, to build on this momentum that we have gathered in the 2020-2021 agricultural season. We believe that we should not be talking about food security. Food security should be a given, and therefore Cabinet recently revised the physical strategic grain reserve from 500,000 metric tons to 1.5 million metric tons. So it is building on this that we actually think we need to grow the maize volumes in 2021-2022 agricultural season by another 33% in order to meet the country's revised strategic grain requirements. And all crops are budgeted to increase. And we've also now begun to give more attention to the livestock and fisheries sector. So we expect more growth also in those areas.
You mentioned about the good rains. That is certainly a good sign when the Lord Himself blesses us with abundant rain. But also, you have done a lot of adequate preparation and planning, which culminates in the results that we're getting. How much of your planning and preparedness are you engaging to further entrench gains by the good rains that we've received?
We have initiated multi-stakeholder consultations, and for the first time, I think, we've consulted extensively with the private sector. I've had more than 8 meetings with the various sectors. For example, we are looking at the enablers and being irrigation development, and we've engaged what we've now called the Irrigation Development Alliance, being a consortium of 11 private companies, to say how do we accelerate irrigation development to the desired 350,000 hectares by 2024 up from the current 216,000 hectares. We've also engaged mechanization and equipment suppliers, the local ones, and formed a Mechanization Accelerated Development Alliance so that we can also mechanize as quickly as possible, not just at the large holder level, but also at the small holder level. We're looking at mechanizing Pfumvudza itself so that we can accelerate that. And in that context, we are planning for an increase in the number of plots for Pfumvudza from the 3 to 5 plots per household. And we are increasing the number of households supported from 1.8 million households to 2.3 million households in the 2021-2022 agricultural season. But we also have now, based on the successes that we've had with Pfumvudza on maize and traditional grains, we are now going to launch a Pfumvudza cotton program. And we anticipate that perhaps the head of state will be able to launch that. And with something that is exciting, we've always given cotton seed for a hectare. Now we are reducing this to a quarter of a hectare, and with the same fertilizer input so that there can be sustainable intensification of production. We are also launching the Presidential Rural Poultry Scheme, in where we anticipate giving roadrunner chickens 10 to each household by 2024. We are doing a goat scheme, presidential goat scheme, where we're anticipating that we'll start with about 1 million goats that will pass on to these households, and the intent passing on to each other. We have another program that we are launching that we call the Presidential Rural Horticulture Scheme, which is a very exciting component. We are anticipating that we'll be able to do 35,000 boreholes in the 35,000 villages by 2025. We are starting with 1,800 boreholes, one per ward this year. We are also starting with one village garden. So for the 1,800 selected villages, we are putting in a village garden complete with solar, a feeding trough for animals, and then we are doing 10 fruit trees for each household. So we can then begin to diversify nutrition, but also diversify income sources in view of climate change. So there's a lot that is happening in this landscape, but it all starts with preparedness and better planning. And that better planning has happened. We already have all our intentions for the 2021-2022 agricultural season approved by government, and we are discussing the rollout of those plans. Inputs for farmers, we've already started distributing inputs for cotton, and we also started distributing inputs for the Pfumvudza program. So we are much more prepared this season than previous seasons, and therefore this, in my view, should translate into increased and better productivity.
Wow. There has been a 23% increase of the area planted as a result of the Meteorological Services Department telling us about the normal rain and above normal rain patterns that we have experienced. And this has resulted in 3.5 million hectares of land that you have actually planted on. Mm-hmm. And speaking about Pfumvudza, how do you factor in Pfumvudza to the layperson, talking about the 23% increase of the land that you have managed to plant that has given us 3.5 million hectares? How do you factor in Pfumvudza to the layperson, defining for us what Pfumvudza is and also factoring it in?
I think we need to look at the broader term strategy for agriculture. We want to achieve 6 outputs for agriculture in order for agriculture to anchor Vision 2030. The first is that we must ensure food security for everyone. We must also reduce and eventually eliminate imports of agricultural commodities, saving the much needed foreign currency which will be deployed to other needy areas. We also need to broaden and diversify our export basket so we can generate more from horticulture, from tobacco, from cotton, and all other crops. I think we must build a base so that we can become an exporter for maize, for wheat, and other commodities. We also must ensure that there is value addition and beneficiation of whatever we produce so that we don't export cotton as lint, we don't export semi-proper processed tobacco alone, but we can value add, because each time we don't value add, we're exporting jobs and we're exporting value. And then we need to look at employment in the agricultural sector. I think agriculture is the biggest potential to employ more people, so it's something that we must attend to. But more importantly, just improvement of livelihood. 70% of the populace is involved in agriculture, so it is agriculture that is going to uplift them for the attainment of Vision 2030. So it is in this context that we then need to look at the long-range planning and the strategies to say this country is predicted, just like other countries in the SADC region, to become drier in the decades ahead. So therefore we must climate-proof our agriculture. And we climate-proof our agriculture through two ways. At the smallholder level, where you can't reach and be able to do irrigation at household level, you need to capture whatever rainfall falls. And you must therefore dig a hole and capture that rainfall. And then you plant your seed. Once you planted your seed, you cover. You must then ensure that the moisture does not evaporate, so the sun must not hit direct, therefore you mulch. That's Pfumvudza. And that is how we climate-proof agriculture at the smallholder level. At the largeholder level, we have said we need to develop irrigation so that we have 350,000 hectares irrigated by 2024. So these are the twin objectives of climate proofing, and that is the context in which we find Pfumvudza. And the 3.5 million hectares are for all the crops, which is a very good expansion. We've seen massive expansion in the command program, as we call it now, National Enhanced Agricultural Productivity Scheme. We still expect some marginal increases in the area, but our focus now is not this horizontal increase, as we call it, but it's a vertical increase. Vertical increase being the increase in the yield per unit area, and that is what we must focus on. If we focus on that, then it will improve farmer viability and make agriculture a business.
Let's shift our focus to maize a bit. In the 2019-2020 season, only 0.9 tons of maize were produced, compared to 2.7 million tons during this season, which registers 193.1% growth to the maize sector. What are you doing to ensure that the gains of the growth that you have experienced in maize, 2.7 million, that is a lot, continue with the momentum?
Yes, certainly we're at 900,000 metric tons in the 2019-2020 season, and we went into a whooping and commendable 2.7 million metric tons in the just ended season. And the average yield has moved from about 0.4 tons per hectare to the current 1.39 tons per hectare, which is still below our expectation, which is why in the 2021-2022 agricultural season, we are budgeting for a 1.8 to 2 tons per hectare as the national average. And again, we're just going to be building on the momentum for Pfumvudza, where we've seen that we can do more than 5 tons per hectare if we adopted this sustainable intensification method, which is why we're expanding the number of plots from 3 to 5 per household. So if we continue on this path, certainly we'll be able to maintain the momentum, which is why we're anticipating that maize production is going to increase from the 2.7 million metric tons to 3.6 million metric tons in the 2021-2022 agricultural season.
Obviously, the maize output is going to be complemented by increases in the output of other grains, which include sorghum, pear millet, and finger millet. This level of output surpasses the national cereal requirement, which is 1.8 million tons and 450,000 tons for human and livestock consumption, respectively. Again, your take.
Yes, certainly. If we combine consumption for food and feed, we're at 2.2 million metric tons. But if you add to that 1.5 million metric tons of the strategic grain reserve, that gives you an indication that we need 3.6 million metric tons, which is why we are targeting the 3.6 million metric tons for production for the 2021-2022 agricultural season, so that we now witness more droughts, recurring droughts, in some instances 2 consecutive droughts, So we must have enough to be able to feed the nation without having to resort to imports. We have seen that with the COVID pandemic, there's been disruption in global supply chains, and there's been quite a lot of nationalism, including vaccine nationalism. So there will also be crop nationalism. So each country will be bound to service its own people first before it does to others. So that is why we are looking at Zimbabwe. It's creating this reserve, which will be enough to last us 3 seasons, and I think it's the right thing to do.
You have designated the Grain Marketing Board, GMB, as the sole buyer of grain. Isn't this a conflict of interest on government's part? Why can't you bring in other players to complement the role that the GMB plays?
In fact, in a developmental society, in a developmental state, government must be both an active player and a facilitator. And as we grow, then the private sector can come in and government can go back to its role of being a facilitator and an enabler. In the current stage, government has to be very actively involved in such things as grains, such things as water provision, and I think this is the right thing. In terms of the specific statutory instruments, 145 of 2019, 96 and 97 and 188 of 2021, these statutory instruments do not prohibit private sector participation in the production of maize, traditional grains, cotton, wheat, and other crops. What this statutory instrument simply says is that those that have not participated in the production through contracting may not purchase. So you cannot harvest where you do not sow. So we encourage private sector participation. So we're actually crowding in the private sector to participate in the production of their raw material. But to do so, we must safeguard that by putting penalties on anyone purchasing outside that framework. And for the strategic grains, we have said the GMB is the buyer of first and last resort outside the contracted maize, cotton, and other crops.
1.9 million tons of grain is expected at a value of 67.7 billion Zimbabwean dollars. I want you to explain to us about AMA bills, how they come in as mechanisms in payment of these deliveries.
No, we are looking at 3 modes of resource mobilization to assist the GMB to pay farmers timelessly. As you know, we said that farmers delivering to depots will be paid within 72 hours, those delivering to collection points within 5 days. We are slightly behind in terms of those payments because there's been an overwhelming response and it's a good season. Farmers have delivered over 700,000 metric tons of grains this year. So we have Treasury through the fiscus funding part of that. We also have asked the Grain Marketing Board to immediately activate their cells so that they can begin to sell grains and oil seeds so they can generate revenue to create a revolving fund to be able to pay farmers timelessly. And the third aspect is to the reconstituted AMA and reactivated to focus on mobilizing resources for GMB, AFC, and other parastatals in the agricultural value chain. And it is in this regard that we are looking at the $20 billion that have been floated through the CBZ and the AFC, that there will be subscription, and this will then go towards payment of farmers for whatever they have delivered.
I know time is not on our side. I just want to move to tobacco. I understand that tobacco grew by 6.1%. The 2019 season, we had 117,000 hectares where tobacco was grown, compared to 125,000 this season. And there have been problems with tobacco. Even though it is the golden leaf, it is returning to that yesteryear status that it used to have as the golden leaf of the country, thanks to the modus operandi that you've introduced. But tobacco farmers, to date, they still cry about the forex that they are not paid in full, that you choose to give them part payment in Zim dollars and part payment in forex, yet they believe that they are earning forex for the nation. Your take?
I think the tobacco sector has grown and it will probably surpass our expectation. As of today, we're actually above 200 million kilograms of tobacco, up from the 184 million that we got last year. Tobacco farmers, just like any exporter, have now been treated equally by the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. And I think tobacco farmers ought to be pleased that last year they were paid 50% of whatever they generated in forex and the balance in Zim dollars. And this year this has gone up to 60%. So most of the farmers have been very pleased with this development. However, there is also that they are increasing costs in US dollar terms. As you are aware, that government has put in place a tobacco transformation plan which seeks to localize the financing of tobacco so that we can then reduce the forex component in the financing of tobacco, which will allow farmers to be able to use the local financing institutions and our own dollar to be able to finance their operations, and only in circumstances where we cannot get those resources locally will we resort to be getting foreign currency. So I think increasingly this problem will be addressed through the localization of financing of the tobacco sector. We will be presenting a very robust tobacco transformation plan to the nation in the coming weeks.
The same problem is attributed to cotton. The previous season, under 74,000 hectares of cotton were grown. Right now, there is a growth of 37.5%. But cotton farmers still argue that they are worse off than tobacco farmers when it comes to the issue of being paid in foreign currency as well. Your take?
Cotton farmers are ultimately exporters, and it is something that we are very excited about, and government has put in place a mechanism where farmers will be part paid in US dollars, and it's $10 per 200 kg wool pack. So this is good but not good enough, and again we are looking at localization of cotton financing so that the forex requirement is reduced, so that and then that increases the viability of farmers. It is something that government is seized with, and we think that there will be an improved payment modalities for the 2021-2022 agricultural season.
The presidential cotton input scheme, contract farmers coming in play, COTCO as well. How is that related?
The presidential cotton input scheme, which will transition to the presidential Vudza cotton scheme, is meant to cushion the 400,000 households that are into cotton growing. And we're going to increase the number of households to 520,000 in the 2021-2022 agricultural season. Because this is a presidential scheme, it means that no one and no place is left behind. It means every eligible cotton farmer in cotton household, in cotton growing areas will be assisted. But for this to happen, government has to find a vehicle through which this cotton will be marketed. Government has a 37% stake in COTCO, and we are increasing this stake to at least 51% so that COTCO becomes an important player. It is the selected designated agent for the transmission of the presidential cotton input scheme. It is in this regard that 95% of the cotton that is currently grown in the country is grown under the presidential cotton input scheme.
Talk about sugar cane. 60% Lake Mturikwi, it's only on 60% full. However, I'm told Tokom Kosi, it actually spilled for the first time, which means that we have adequate water for the sugarcane industry. But even talking about that, I'm told that the water resources that we have can only accommodate 75% of the sugarcane industry. What is happening with the other 25%?
I think the correct statistics are that both Mutirikwi and Tugwi Mukosi were at 100% full this year. We've decommissioned Lake Mutirikwi for supply of water for sugarcane in the Lowveld. We've also decommissioned Mushwi Dam And these two, Moyo Dam and Lake Mtrigu, will be able to irrigate at least another 5,000 hectares that we are developing within the Masvingo area. Regarding Lake Mukosi, this can irrigate 40,000 hectares, but we now have been able to supply water to the sugarcane areas, and we are supplying as much as they want. So there is no limitation of water at this stage. There is actually a limitation of the area under irrigation, and it is something that we are accelerating. We've identified up to 25,000 hectares to be irrigated under the Mukosi master plan, and that master plan will be made known in fuller detail in a week or so to come.
Let's wind down on wheat. Wheat experienced a growth of 32% from 212,000 to 282,000. Yet we still have a problem of the increase, like in bread. Yet we produce the wheat here. Why isn't there a mechanism that ensures that bread, a basic commodity, is affordable to everybody if we are producing wheat to such magnitude?
I think we need to look at the historical context where in the past 4 seasons or so, we were only able to produce wheat enough for about 2-3 months consumption in the country. We're looking at 30,000 metric tons per month consumption, 360,000 metric tons per year. Last year, we produced a cumulative 212,000 tons. It is the 2021 winter wheat production, which we estimate to be somewhere in the region of 280,000 and maybe 320,000. And that is to be harvested from September onwards. Until such time we are able to produce sufficient to meet our requirements, this country will always be subjected to the exigencies of the international market, and wheat prices are firming on the international market, and we are importing that, and that will result in imported inflation and imported increases in the price of bread. So if we are able to lay a firm foundation for self-sufficiency in wheat this year, it means that next year we can simply do more and even build a stage where we'll be able to export some of our surplus wheat, in addition to creating a robust strategic grain reserve.
COTCO paid some debts to farmers and growers through basic commodities and groceries. Yet I made to understand that $1.5 billion was availed to the payment of that debt to cotton farmers. If you can update us on that one.
Yes, certainly. I think because of what was happening in terms of money transfer systems last year and hyperinflation, the government saw it fit to suspend the payment of that platform, and that affected cotton farmers. COTCO had to be innovative to pay farmers through other means, so groceries and other issues were utilized to try and assist growers. And that carried a debt of $1.5 billion, which government has owned. To date, government has paid $620 million to farmers, and we are continuing with this thrust to be able to extinguish these obligations arising out of the subsidy to cotton farmers. We are also accelerating payments for the deliveries for the 2021-2022, for the 2020 agricultural season. So I think everything is in place, and farmers that I have interacted with have acknowledged that government has indeed lived up to its expectation to pay this legacy debt.
One of the big stories is the US $3.5 billion compensation for the former white commercial farmers. We are winding down on that one. US $3.5 billion. I made to understand that you have been making moves with the Ministry of Finance to be able to pay off these farmers, to compensate them for the land that we took from them. What is your government stance right now, your policy regarding this US $3.5 billion, and how far are we in compensating these former commercial farmers?
I think the correct perspective is that former farm owners and government agreed on a compensation figure, global compensation figure of US dollars $3.5 billion. This is for improvements only. Government will not pay for the land. So the improvements on these farms are valued at that. And over 96% of the former farm owners have signed up to this deal. We've subsequently formed the Joint Resources Mobilization Committee that is seized with the matter of raising the requisite resources to ensure that the compensation is done in the framework that has been agreed with the former farm owners. So that clarifies the position regarding the $3.5 billion.
This is where we end our interview. We are going to continue part 2 with the Minister of Lands, Agriculture, Fisheries, Water and Irrigation Development, Dr. Jongwe Masuka, for the strides that he has made since becoming Minister of Lands. In fact, when you started, I remember even from across the political divide, those MPs who are hard to please applauded you for a sterling job since you became Minister. We really thank you for your time. We thank you for the efforts, and we hope to continue part 2. Dr. Masuka.
Thank you for the kind words.
Thank you.
And have a good day.
Thanks.